What's going on? Oh, there we go. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Future State Swamp Thing. I got two books here to talk about. So Future State was a series of tie-ins that basically ran across DC's entire publication line at the beginning of the year. It featured a ton of different characters in different time periods across a potential future timeline of DC. They might not even all be in the same timeline per se, but these are just in the spirit of the infinite frontier, one of the many possible futures that we're seeing. But a lot of the stories are interrelated, though Swamp Thing is a good one to start off with since it's kind of on its own. As the first one, because we're a little behind on reviews, I still do want to talk about some of these Future State books because they look really cool. And Swamp Thing feels like a good one to start off with because it takes place in the far future and largely feels like it exists within its own parameters at the moment. But the other side of this is these books are written by Rom V, who wrote a couple of Catwoman books we reviewed recently that I quite enjoyed, and is also the current writer of the Swamp Thing series that was kind of one of the first series to sort of come out of Future State and into DC's like new Infinite Frontier lineup. And though I have the first issue, I haven't read it myself, but I've heard really good things. And so this is kind of me recognizing the impetus of wanting to also get into that. So and then finally, the other thing I was thinking of kind of just in the hour before leading up to this stream, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the world of comic books and beyond lately between, like, there's Nintendo Direct, some weird news out of DC from the Harley Quinn series and all this other stuff. I expect there might be questions here and there about that. I'm going to try and mostly keep us on topic for Swamp Thing, but so many of those topics that just glossed over feel like whole streams onto themselves, so I might just kind of push those off for now and mostly focus on this series. In that spirit, chat has mostly been on topic so far. K5, The Ninja Genko, Heroic Heartless, thanks for joining. K5 asks, is Swamp Thing Holland or the other guy now? In the Future State books, and very safe assumption, the Swamp Thing series by Rom, it is Alec Holland, and we're just focusing on that for the moment. It seems like most of the attention's on Alec Holland these days, which kind of gets into, I think that's who this is, but yeah, it's got to be, right? I'm sure it's in the narration, but either way, the reason that I'm hesitating is Swamp Thing has changed a lot by the time we see him. You'd have to go back and listen to my preview of Future State to know exactly where this falls in the timeline, but it is the very far future. As I recall, this is the second farthest in the future out of all the series, with one other kind of taking place at the end of time. Otherwise, this takes place in the year like 5000 or something. But it's also a little irrelevant. It's so far in the future that humanity has basically been wiped out, and the Green has taken over Earth yet again. Swamp Thing, and again, like I believe it's Alec Holland based on his memories, because he's kind of he knows a lot of the superheroes and thinks about that stuff. But eventually, it all just receded back into the Green. And Swamp Thing even has this family now, each with their own characteristics and attitudes. And throughout the narration, which really, I think, gets into where people start to get excited about this writer for Swamp Thing, he goes into the detail of creating these organisms and having to build a plant version of muscle tissue and a synthetic brain along those lines based on more botanical life. So, for example, he talks about how getting them to have muscle function resembling humans was difficult. It required a combination of special tissue and this something called a thigmonastic response. And he talks about having to grow membranes. But once he kind of had the underlying structure, improving on it was easy because he wasn't held back by human limitations. So for skin, he could use leaves instead of just having to like deal with like a very limited set of carbon tissue. It's really interesting and kind of gets into a lot of gobbledygook, but frames the story really well. As the Swamp Things are going off, he saves some of his children, gets to know them, and they're kind of just like wandering these empty cities now. And eventually they find one of their own kind killed up in Nunavut, and they suspect that there's some surviving humans around. And sure enough, some of Swamp Thing's children do stumble upon them, but eventually Swamp Thing arrives and kind of stops them from killing these humans on sight, because they're like, whoa, like, what are these creatures? You're not supposed to be alive anymore. Father says you were very destructive, like all these things and stuff. But he says, like, no, don't harm them. Like, they had no idea humans were still alive. And he kind of introduces himself, saying, like, I'm a thing from a swamp very long ago. And they say that they met that these small band of humans were, like, surviving in this star fortress. Eventually they were found by someone they called the Undying Man. And Swamp Thing has him be led there into the next issue, and we learn it's the Floronic Man, who did something very strange to himself. I don't really fully understand it, but basically he tried to implant himself with the green, and then also has this plan with the superhero Obsidian to block out the sun, and basically in revenge for the green rejecting him, he because Floronic Man tried to bond with the green. That's what I mean by he did something very strange with himself to, like, because already Floronic Man's a weird being and already served a weird role in the Swamp Thing series, which is what I like about in particular this story in this series from Rom. He clearly like did his homework, but is telling something new and different while also having an understanding of what Swamp Thing is and the depth of his power, as well as the depth of his character too, which I think is important to understanding him. So Floronic Man wants to use Obsidian to block out the sun in revenge for the green rejecting him, and he's kind of convinced the humans, well, this is the only way you're going to survive because the green just wiped you out, basically. And we learn, which is kind of the impression I got from the first issue, but this is a spoiler. Also, K5, thank you so much for the donation and the fun sticker about it's a little fox with the number one thing. And I really do appreciate that. You are in a lot of our streams and are kind of like this unsung hero among our community, so thank you so much for the $5. Now, so like I said, it was kind of always obvious to me that Swamp Thing was like the one who the Green chose to, like, basically just it got fed up with humanity, fed up with the destruction of its environment, and done something it kind of always was able to do in the world of DC, which is just like wipe humanity straight off the map. And Swamp Thing actually didn't tell his children of that, and it's a whole revelation and stuff, but regardless, it's too late, actually. Floronic Man launches his mission and begins to block out the sun, even as he's killed by Alec Halton, or like Swamp Thing. And so he decides, in response, to just basically destroy his own children, basically reabsorbing them into himself, because in each of them, like, he kind of put a little of himself in them and his own powers so that they could exist. So he's withdrawing all that, like my innocence, my doubt, my ambition. I need it all, because he's going to stop Obsidian from blocking out the sun by basically turning into a giant tree and absorbing the darkness, as I understand it. And out of this giant tree, humanity makes its new home. So basically Swamp Thing sacrifices himself to save humanity, and very directly it becomes an allegory where his children are like, why are you choosing them over us? And he's like, well, because they have the capacity to be more, and I kind of just made you because I missed them almost, even though I think he was almost forced to destroy humanity, but that's left very ambiguous as to what degree of choice he had in the matter when the Green just decided humanity was done. But he has a choice in this, and I think he does choose, like, because humanity has this potential to grow, whereas these children he made out of the green are almost like androids or constructs or something. They can only really be what he created them to be. The one that he created out of doubt, I think, is like Mugon or something like that. But regardless, they're made just to doubt. Like, he's made just to doubt and question Swamp Thing. The child is always just meant to be a child and not grow into anything else. It just represents Swamp Thing's innocence. So they're all just kind of parts of his psyche and can't replicate humanity, even though that's kind of what he created them for, because, like I said, he missed them. And so in this new giant tree, like I said, humanity makes its home and begins to regrow. And it was like they go on to tell stories of Swamp Thing. It's that kind of story where it's just like a glimmer of hope in this relatively dark future. But I think the overall narrative, it's very like introspective and kind of talking about Swamp Thing coming to terms with what he did, and him, when faced with that choice again, basically choosing humanity over the green. And so it's more of like an internal journey than this explicit future alternate history thing, which for Swamp Thing feels very on brand and appropriate. So if you look at the story on its most basic level, it's like, okay, Swamp Thing's in the future. I'll talk about stuff in chat because there's interesting things going on in there in a second. But like on the most basic level is this alternate future. Swamp Thing and the Green wiped out humanity, and all that's left is his children. They find some humans, but they're plotting to basically take revenge against the Green, but destroy themselves in the process. So Swamp Thing sacrifices himself to kind of make amends. That's a very concise and simple story for 2 issues, but as I tried to kind of convey throughout this review, it's getting into like a more psychological story as well, which I really appreciate. And I think that kind of layered storytelling is what put Swamp Thing on the map as a DC character to begin with. Huh. Got to slow down in streaming. Oh, that's really slow. Okay. Seems to be chopping back up again. Maybe I'm just gonna make a quick change here. We are using a lot of bandwidth at the moment in this particular household, which might explain that. So if I'm lagging, I apologize. Oh, it kind of just bounced back when I close Steam, so maybe that'll help. Anyways. So yeah, well, that's pretty much it. But I really did enjoy it, and like I said, not like I said. My conclusion to it all is it really leaves me optimistic for an already well-regarded series by Rom V in Swamp Thing. Last time we reviewed him with the Catwoman books, by the way, I had no idea how to pronounce that name and kind of like neglected to look it up beforehand. He did, and I did find a little Twitter, or like a single tweet by Rom where he actually clarified how to pronounce it, which is helpful. But that tweet was also very good-natured about it. He's like, well, for the record, this is how you pronounce it, but it's not that big a deal, kind of thing. So that's cool. But now we know, and it's good to know because he seems a real up-and-comer writer in the world of DC right now, and one that is just rock solid in all the books we've read so far. I haven't read a lot by this guy, don't know a lot about the person in particular, but everything I've read so far I've enjoyed. And we will be talking about the Swamp Thing series because I already have some of those issues lying around, and I'm looking forward to it. So, meanwhile in chat, the Heroic Heartless says, I'm actually writing a My Hero Academia and DC fanfic where Izuku is Swamp Thing. Oh, that's really cool, because I kind of saw chat was talking about My Hero Academia a bit, and something about fanfic. It's like, oh, okay, but I didn't see how it tied into Swamp Thing. That's actually really interesting. Something that really... So I'm just going to think out loud. My immediate thoughts in response to that is something cool about the world of My Hero Academia is it's very compatible with DC. And those worlds could coexist or, like, merge together. Whatever narrative you wanted to go about, like, telling that story. in a very coherent way, because My Hero Academia is an anime series and manga where everyone in the world, well, no, most everyone in the world is born with superpowers, and Izuku's the main character. Now, knowing that character and him becoming Swamp Thing, I agree, like, would be very interesting and is worth exploring. And especially something like that is kind of the perfect thing for fanfic. Now, my only request is when you're done, come back to here and share it with us, and I'll take a look, because that sounds interesting. Now, K5 was asking about My Hero Academia, but I just explained that. So, and Hero Cartless was explaining that in chat a bit. K5 says, I should pick up the Future State Swamp Thing. I don't know many Swamp Thing stories. Well, the most popular recommendation is certainly Swamp Thing Volume 2 by Alan Moore. It's much more superficial and simple in its design, but I really enjoyed Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing from New 52, and if anything, kind of consider it a relative bright spot in the New 52. I'm sure there's more gems than that. This is nice as its own standalone thing, and you don't really need to know a lot about Swamp Thing to appreciate it. The stuff about Obsidian and Pharaonic Man kind of come out of nowhere, to the extent I don't even know how much they refer to him as Pharaonic Man and not just by his name, like Jason Woodrue, which is a real... That's obscure for people, and for someone who doesn't know a lot about Swamp Thing, that's like, well, what's that? But you've seen this review, so you'll know that now, and that should help you a little bit. K5 says, I'm behind on Catwoman, only read one Ram 5 story, issue 9, but I did like it. Well, the thing is, I've only read a couple of issues of Catwoman by him as well, but I like them both, and I think it's a he, but I've never actually seen a picture of this person or anything even. But regardless, they seem to have a really good handle on the character, and even more so on Swamp Thing, because like I said, well, not even like I said, the thing about Swamp Thing is because of the standards set by Alan Moore, I think there is a certain expectation for it to be really thoughtful and dense and interesting, and Ram V had that in his writing, and so that's where I got really interested, because Scott Snyder was doing interesting and different things with Swamp Thing, but they weren't this like thoughtful and interesting thing where we're talking about how like a plant grew into a person on a very detailed and cellular level. That was so cool to me, and the writing is very creative and different and kind of reminded me a lot of Alan Moore, which is something I haven't seen at a Swamp Thing outside of Alan Moore stuff ever, potentially. I'd have to really think about that and sit down and look at the character's history, but I don't know if it's been done much. So for someone to at least grapple with that while also not just trying to copy Alan Moore is great, because I think that's the mistake other people make, is they just go in that direction without really having any sense of it themselves. This isn't an Alan Moore Swamp Thing story. This is a Ram V Swamp Thing story, but it has the level of sophistication that Alan Moore was leveling in a lot of his books. Sort of. I'm generously saying that because this is only 2 issues, so it can only do so much in 2 issues, and I'm kind of gauging it by those terms, which is why I'm more interested in the 12-issue run that's been planned for like a more proper Swamp Thing series and what gets done in that, because then I think I can make a more definitive statement about just how sophisticated we're going to be getting with this character here. And I know that was all a very pretentious way of saying that, like, this is just a well-written character historically, and I would kind of like to see more of that. But, you know, it happens once in a while. I went back to a couple of Swamp Thing issues by Alan Moore for the Spectre videos we've been working on, and they are fantastic and creative, different and interesting, and really get into some of the stuff that we've kind of broached, not necessarily here, but like just like it gets into those philosophical questions about like the nature of humanity, its value and stuff, which is explored here, whereas the book I was looking at before was exploring the nature of good and evil and stuff like that. So different topics, but a similar level of enthusiasm for the intellectual side of this character, because in spite of Swamp Thing just being this big green monster, he's very quiet and thoughtful, which I like. And I am a bit of a fan of this character, which is why I do try and find little moments to talk about him here and there. Now, Heroic Heartless says, I'm hoping to get the omnibus of the early years of Swamp Thing and the Frank Miller omnibus for Christmas this year. Well, there are those other books too. Swamp Thing was created by Len Wein, who is also a good writer too, and there are earlier stuff as well. It's just not where people typically start their recommendation, and I do kind of drift towards Alan Moore. Oh, and that's what Heroic Heartless meant instead of Frank Miller, because I was also not entirely sure what you meant. But I hope you get that as well, because those are great books. But if you have the complete set, that's pretty cool too. And both omnibuses are an excellent companion piece to any collection. It really is kind of considered part of like this essential hierarchy in the history of comics, and kind of their transformation into something that can service not just like kids but all ages, and can really get into some interesting ideas that were not even touched on and kind of still haven't been in like film and television. So I think that's why people value it. Nowadays, Swamp Thing's a little less unique, the Alan Moore stuff. Just people have used a lot of that content at this point, and kind of drawn inspiration from it and gone in their own directions, to the extent that people will read those books and sort of recognize some of the more crazy stuff that goes on there. Whereas I think when it came out, nobody had read anything like that before, or seen anything like it before. Which is where I kind of get into, like, it's easy for a lot of Swamp Thing books since then to kind of go in that direction and try and do those things, but lack some of the finesse, I feel, that Alan Moore and his artists had at the time. I don't know who I should be saying for that. K5 says, only Swamp Thing story I have is where Holland and Vampire Batman team up to kill vampires. I think I'll hunt down the Swamp Thing, or the Snyder run on Swamp Thing, thanks. I haven't heard of the Vampire Batman story where he teams up with Swamp Thing, but that's interesting. Although, now that I'm saying it out loud, it does vaguely ring a bell. That's interesting, though. So yeah, I think it's a definite solid recommend. We didn't actually get off topic like I kind of thought we might have earlier at the stream, so maybe we'll just leave it there, because that feels like a pretty solid discussion about these two books, and leaves me with more room to kind of just get other stuff ready, because, you know, I'll just show you guys since it's over here. There are other future state books to talk about and all that, and I'd like to get to it. So thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island.